I'll never forget the moment Dr. Martinez looked at me with those sympathetic eyes and said, "Sarah, I'm so sorry, but the baby isn't going to make it." I was 7 months pregnant, lying in that sterile hospital bed after what should have been a routine checkup turned into my worst nightmare. My husband wasn't even there. He was on another one of his business trips that I was starting to suspect weren't really about business at all. The monitors around me were beeping frantically, and I could feel my world crumbling as the doctor explained that my placenta had partially detached, cutting off vital nutrients and oxygen to my baby girl. They told me to prepare for the worst, that even if she survived the next few hours, she would likely have severe complications that would make life impossible. I was completely alone, scared out of my mind, and about to lose the only thing that mattered to me in this world. Let me back up and tell you how I got to this point, because this wasn't just a medical emergency. It was the culmination of months of betrayal, abandonment, and heartbreak that had been slowly destroying me from the inside out. My husband Mark and I had been trying to get pregnant for 3 years. We'd gone through fertility treatments, countless doctor visits, and more disappointment than I ever thought I could handle. When we finally got that positive pregnancy test, I thought it was going to be our fresh start. I thought it would bring us closer together. I was so wrong. Instead of bringing us together, the pregnancy seemed to push Mark further away. He started working longer hours, taking more trips, and when he was home he was distant and cold. I tried to tell myself it was just stress from the new responsibility, that he was probably scared about becoming a father. But deep down I knew something else was going on. The late-night phone calls that he would take in another room, the way he would quickly close his laptop when I walked into the room, the receipts I found for restaurants I'd never been to, all the classic signs that I was desperately trying to ignore. The final blow came when I was 6 months pregnant. I was having some complications and needed to go to the hospital for monitoring. Mark was supposed to drive me, but at the last minute he said he had an emergency meeting and couldn't make it. I had to call my neighbor to take me, and I spent 8 hours alone in the emergency room, terrified that something was wrong with my baby, while my husband was God knows where doing God knows what. That night when he finally came home, I confronted him. I asked him straight out if he was having an affair. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. He didn't deny it. He just stood there looking at me like I was some kind of burden he couldn't wait to get rid of. Then he said the words that still echo in my mind. "I never wanted this baby, Sarah. I never wanted any of this. I can't do this anymore." He packed a bag that night and moved in with her, his secretary, of all the cliché choices he could have made. So there I was, 7 months pregnant, abandoned by my husband, facing the biggest challenge of my life completely alone. I tried to stay strong for my baby, but the stress was eating me alive. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating properly, and I was crying more than I cared to admit. My blood pressure was through the roof, and I was constantly worried about whether the stress was hurting my baby. My family lived across the country, and I was too proud to tell them what was really going on. I kept making excuses for why Mark wasn't around, pretending everything was fine when everything was falling apart. The morning I ended up in the hospital, I had woken up feeling strange. There was a sharp pain in my abdomen that wouldn't go away, and when I went to the bathroom there was blood. I knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. I drove myself to the hospital, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, praying over and over again, "Please let my baby be okay, please let my baby be okay." The emergency room was a blur of questions, tests, and worried faces. They hooked me up to monitors immediately and I could hear my baby's heartbeat, but it sounded different, slower, weaker than it had at my last appointment. Dr. Martinez came in with a team of other doctors, and I knew from their expressions that the news wasn't good. That's when they told me about the placental abruption, explained that it was severe, and that they didn't think my baby would survive. "We need to prepare you for the possibility that we might lose her," Dr. Martinez said, his voice gentle but firm. "Even if we can deliver her now at 7 months with the complications from the abruption, her chances of survival are very slim. And if she does survive, there could be severe brain damage from the lack of oxygen." I felt like I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. After everything I had been through, after all the heartbreak and betrayal, was I going to lose my baby too? The one thing I had left, the one thing that was giving my life meaning? I started to cry, not just tears but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. "I need to call my husband," I managed to say through my tears. "Of course," the nurse said kindly. "Is there a number where we can reach him?" I called Mark's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called his office, but his assistant said he was unavailable. I even swallowed my pride and called the number I had found for the other woman, but no one answered. In my darkest moment when I needed him most, Mark was nowhere to be found. The nurses could see how distressed I was getting, which was only making things worse for the baby, so they asked if there was anyone else they could call. I realized in that moment just how alone I really was. I had isolated myself during the pregnancy, too embarrassed to tell people about my marriage problems, too proud to ask for help. I had no one. The only person I could think of was Mrs. Chin, my elderly neighbor who had driven me to the hospital before. But what could she do in a situation like this? She was 78 years old and barely spoke English. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. They were monitoring me constantly, trying to keep the baby stable while they figured out the best course of action. Every time one of the monitors started beeping differently, my heart would race. The doctors came in and out, having hushed conversations that I couldn't quite hear but that sounded increasingly pessimistic. At one point they brought in a chaplain, which I took as a very bad sign. I must have dozed off from exhaustion at some point because I woke up to find someone sitting in the chair next to my bed. For a split second I thought it might be Mark, that he had finally gotten my messages and come to be with me. But when my eyes focused, I saw it was Mrs. Chin, my neighbor. She was holding a small paper bag and had the most determined look on her weathered face that I had ever seen. "Sarah dear," she said in her heavily accented English, "I come as soon as I hear. The nurse, she called me because you put me as emergency contact on your form last time." I started to cry again, but this time it wasn't just from sadness. It was from relief. I wasn't completely alone after all. This woman who barely knew me, who owed me nothing, had dropped everything to come sit with me in my darkest hour. But Mrs. Chin wasn't just there to hold my hand. She had brought something with her, a thermos of homemade soup and what looked like some kind of traditional Chinese medicine. "My grandmother was midwife in China," she explained, carefully measuring out what looked like dried herbs into a cup of hot water. "She teach me many things about difficult babies, about keeping mothers strong when doctors say no hope." Now, I'm not usually one for alternative medicine, and in any other circumstance I probably would have politely declined. But I was desperate, and there was something about Mrs. Chen's confidence that made me want to trust her. The doctors had basically told me to prepare to lose my baby. What did I have to lose by trying something different? The herbal tea tasted terrible, but I drank every drop. Mrs. Chen also had me eat her soup, even though I didn't feel like eating anything. She talked to me in a mixture of English and what I assumed was Mandarin, telling me stories about her own difficult pregnancy many years ago in China, how her baby had been born too early and wasn't expected to live, but had grown up to become a doctor in California. "Bodies sometimes know better than doctors," she said, gently rubbing my hand. "Mother's love sometimes stronger than medicine. You keep talking to your baby. Tell her you love her. Tell her to stay strong. Babies, they listen." I felt foolish at first, but I started talking to my belly, whispering to my baby girl. I told her about all the things we were going to do together, about the nursery I had painted yellow because we wanted to be surprised, about the gender, about the lullabies I was going to sing to her. Mrs. Chin nodded approvingly and continued to feed me spoonfuls of her soup. Something strange started to happen over the next few hours. I could feel the baby moving more than she had been, and the monitors showed that her heartbeat was getting stronger. The nurses came in to check on us more frequently, and I could see confusion on their faces as they looked at the readouts. Around midnight, Dr. Martinez came back in, looking at his tablet with a puzzled expression. "Sarah, I have to say your baby's vitals are looking much better than they were this afternoon. Her heart rate has stabilized and the blood flow appears to have improved. I'm not sure what's changed, but this is unexpected." Mrs. Chin just smiled and patted my hand, but didn't say anything to the doctor about the herbs or the soup. The improvement continued through the night. By morning, Dr. Martinez was calling it remarkable and highly unusual. The placental abruption was still there, but somehow the baby was getting enough oxygen and nutrients to not just survive, but to actually thrive. They were still concerned about delivering her early, but the immediate crisis had passed. "I have to be honest with you," Dr. Martinez said during his morning rounds. "Last night I was preparing for the worst-case scenario. What I'm seeing today defies medical explanation. Your baby appears to be stable, and if she continues to improve like this, we might be able to keep her in there for a few more weeks. I looked over at Mrs. Chen, who was still sitting in the chair next to my bed, having refused to leave all night. She had that same knowing smile on her face. "Sometimes," she whispered to me, "ancient wisdom and mother's love work better than hospital machines." Over the next 2 weeks, I remained in the hospital under careful observation, and my baby continued to exceed everyone's expectations. Mrs. Chen visited every day, bringing her soup and her herbal teas, and more importantly, bringing her unwavering belief that everything was going to be okay. She became the mother figure I desperately needed during those crucial weeks. Other people started showing up too. When Mrs. Chen told the other neighbors what was happening, they organized a meal train for when I got home. My coworkers sent flowers and cards. Even some people I barely knew from my prenatal yoga class came to visit. I realized that I had been so focused on my failing marriage that I had overlooked all the other people in my life who genuinely cared about me. At 35 weeks, my water broke naturally, and after 12 hours of labor my daughter Emma was born. She weighed 5 pounds 3 ounces, small but perfectly healthy. When they placed her on my chest for the first time, she looked up at me with these bright, alert eyes as if to say, "See, Mom? I told you I was a fighter." The doctors were amazed. Not only had Emma survived what they had considered an impossible situation, but she showed no signs of the brain damage or developmental delays they had warned me about. She was small but strong, breathing on her own, and her reflexes were perfect. Mark did eventually show up at the hospital, 2 days after Emma was born. He looked uncomfortable and out of place, and I could tell he was only there out of some sense of obligation, not because he genuinely wanted to be there. He held Emma for maybe 5 minutes before making an excuse about having to get back to work. Looking at him holding our daughter, I felt nothing but pity. He was missing out on the most incredible experience of our lives because he was too selfish and scared to embrace it. That was the moment I knew I was going to be okay. I didn't need Mark to validate my worth or to make my family complete. Emma and I were already complete, just the two of us. We had survived something that the medical professionals said was impossible. And we had done it together with the help of an angel in the form of a 78-year-old Chinese woman who believed in the power of love and ancient wisdom. Emma is now 2 years old, and she's the most vibrant, intelligent, curious little girl you could imagine. She runs everywhere instead of walking, she talks constantly, and she has this infectious laugh that makes everyone around her smile. Sometimes I look at her and think about that night when the doctors told me she wouldn't survive, and I'm filled with such overwhelming gratitude that I have to sit down. Mrs. Chen is like a grandmother to Emma now. She babysits when I have to work late, teaches Emma Mandarin words, and still makes us soup when either of us is feeling under the weather. She saved both our lives that night in the hospital, and I will never be able to repay her for that. As for Mark, we're divorced now, which was actually a blessing in disguise. I'm raising Emma on my own, and we're both thriving. I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be, and Emma is proof that miracles do happen when you refuse to give up hope. The experience taught me that sometimes the people who show up for you in your darkest moments aren't the ones you expect. Sometimes it's the neighbor you barely know, the coworkers you don't socialize with outside of work, or the strangers who become friends. And sometimes when all the medical science and technology say something is impossible, love and faith and a little ancient wisdom can prove them wrong. If you're going through something similar, if you're facing what feels like an impossible situation with your pregnancy, or if you're feeling alone and abandoned during what should be the most joyful time of your life, I want you to know that you're stronger than you realize. Don't be afraid to accept help from unexpected places. Don't be too proud to lean on people who want to support you. And never, ever give up hope even when the doctors tell you to prepare for the worst. Emma and I are living proof that miracles can happen, that love really can conquer the impossible, and that sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. Your story isn't over yet, and neither is your baby's. If this story resonated with you, if you've been through something similar, or if you're facing challenges with your own pregnancy right now, please share your experience in the comments below. Your story could be the encouragement someone else desperately needs to hear. Hit the like button if this gave you hope, and subscribe to our channel for more real stories of triumph over impossible odds. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and your strength is greater than you know.